The night I left, nothing was wrong. That's the part people don't understand when I try to explain it, quietly, without drama, without accusations. There was no fight, no collapse, no moment of public failure that forced my hand. My life was working. It had a rhythm. A structure. A future that made sense on paper. People looked at me and saw progress, stability, a path unfolding exactly as it should. And yet, standing there, keys in my hand, I felt a certainty so calm it scared me. If I stayed, I would disappear completely. Not suddenly. Not tragically. Just slowly, politely, in ways no one would notice until it was far too late. I didn't always feel this way. There was a time when the life I was building felt like a choice. A time when I believed effort would turn into fulfillment if I stayed disciplined long enough. I said yes to opportunities that looked right, followed advice that sounded wise, accepted responsibilities because that's what grown people do. I told myself meaning would arrive after stability. So I built stability. Brick by brick. Day by day. Decision by decision that made sense, that earned approval, that didn't raise unnecessary questions. I became dependable. Predictable. Someone others trusted. I mistook that trust for belonging. The first sign something was wrong wasn't sadness. It was detachment. A strange emotional distance that crept in quietly, like background noise you only notice when it stops. Moments stopped landing. I could be present in important conversations and feel nothing afterward. I could achieve something I had worked toward for years and feel relief instead of joy. Relief that it was over. Relief that I could move on to the next obligation. I told myself this was adulthood. I told myself passion fades and responsibility replaces it. That the intensity of wanting things belongs to youth, and maturity is learning how to live without it. That lie kept me going for a long time. From the outside, my life became impressive. From the inside, it became narrow. Not restrictive, just specific. Defined. There was a right way to continue and many wrong ways to disrupt it. I learned how to stay within the lines. I filtered my thoughts before speaking. I softened doubts before they could become questions. I postponed feelings that didn't fit the timeline. I became skilled at endurance. People praised that. They called me strong. What they didn't see was how much energy it took to keep myself aligned with a life that no longer felt like mine. Every day required a small act of self-correction. Every decision came with a quiet negotiation. Is this reasonable? Will this disappoint anyone? Does this keep everything intact? Those questions guided me more than desire ever did. I didn't feel trapped. I felt managed. The realization that finally broke through came during an ordinary moment. No epiphany, no breakdown. I was listening to someone talk about their plans, their excitement obvious and unfiltered, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming grief. Not jealousy. Recognition. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had spoken about my future without editing myself. Without translating what I wanted into something acceptable. Without checking how it would sound to someone else. That's when the thought arrived, clear and unforgiving, I'm living a life that requires my absence to function. That thought changed everything. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I started noticing how often I disappeared inside my own days. How quickly I defaulted to agreement. How rarely I chose something simply because it felt true. I realized I had been living as a caretaker of expectations, my own and everyone else's. The scariest part was this, no one had forced me. I had chosen this life willingly, believing it was the responsible thing to do. Believing that wanting more was dangerous, selfish, unrealistic. Believing that if something felt wrong, it was my job to adjust, not the life's job to fit. I had adjusted myself almost out of existence. The idea of leaving terrified me. Not because I didn't know how, but because I knew exactly what I would lose. Approval. Predictability. A version of myself that looked good from the outside. Leaving meant becoming a disappointment. To others, yes, but more painfully, to my past self who had worked so hard to build this life in the first place. I carried that weight quietly for months. I stayed longer than I should have. I tried to convince myself the feeling would pass. I tried to fix my disconnection with rest, distraction, gratitude. I tried everything except the one thing that scared me most. Admitting that this life, successful, stable, admired, was not the one I wanted to keep living. The night I finally left, I didn't feel brave. I felt honest. I understood that staying would be easier, and that ease would cost me everything I couldn't name but deeply needed. I wasn't running toward a better life. I was running away from erasure. I closed the door quietly. No announcements. No explanations. Just a decision made too late to be painless, but not too late to matter. As I stepped into the unknown, one thought followed me, steady and undeniable: they may never understand why I left. But for the first time in years, I understood why I couldn't stay. Freedom didn't feel the way I expected it to. I thought leaving would feel like release, like air rushing back into lungs that had been compressed for too long. I imagined relief, clarity, maybe even excitement. Something that would confirm I had made the right decision. Instead, I felt empty. Not peaceful emptiness. Not calm. A hollow, echoing space where certainty used to live. The moment the door closed behind me, the life I had escaped stopped pushing against me, and without that pressure, I realized how much of my identity had been built in opposition to it. I didn't know who I was without the structure I had rejected. The first days were the hardest. Not because anything bad happened, but because nothing told me what to do. No schedule shaped by obligation. No expectations to meet. No version of myself I needed to maintain. I woke up and felt a strange panic. For years, my days had been full before they even began. Tasks, responsibilities, roles, they told me who I was supposed to be. Now there was silence. And silence is unforgiving when you've been running from yourself. Guilt arrived quickly. Not loud guilt, persistent guilt. The kind that asks the same questions over and over. Was I ungrateful? Did I exaggerate the problem? Did I abandon something valuable out of restlessness? I replayed conversations that never happened. Imagined explanations I would never give. I pictured people shaking their heads, labeling my decision as impulsive, immature, selfish. Their imagined disappointment hurt more than any real confrontation could have. Because part of me agreed with them. I had left a life many people wanted. A life that made sense. A life that others would have been proud to keep. I wondered if I had destroyed something irreplaceable just because I couldn't tolerate discomfort. Freedom, I learned, doesn't erase doubt. It amplifies it. Without the old structure, every feeling felt louder. Fear. Regret. Loneliness. I couldn't blame exhaustion or routine anymore. There was nothing between me and my thoughts. I tried to distract myself. New places. New routines. New faces. I told myself this was starting over. But starting over is not the same as starting clean. The past follows you quietly. I realized how much of my self-worth had been tied to being needed, admired, reliable. Without that validation, I felt exposed. Ordinary. Unremarkable. There were moments when I almost went back. Not because I missed the life, but because I missed being certain of my role. The old life offered instant identity. Return, and everything would make sense again. The path was already there. All I had to do was step back into it. That temptation scared me. Because it revealed something uncomfortable. I hadn't escaped yet. I had only removed the cage. The instinct to stay small, to adapt, to disappear for the sake of stability was still alive inside me. Leaving the life didn't automatically mean I had reclaimed myself. That realization hit hard. I saw how deeply conditioned I was to measure my worth through approval. How easily I questioned my own feelings when they conflicted with logic or expectation. How often I still asked myself whether my choice was reasonable instead of whether it was true. I carried the old life inside me. And that was heavier than I expected. One night, sitting alone in a place no one associated with me yet, I felt a wave of grief I couldn't suppress. Not just grief for what I had left behind, but for how long I had waited to leave. I mourned the years I had spent negotiating with myself. The energy I had poured into endurance. The moments of aliveness I had postponed because they didn't fit the plan. That grief didn't ask for reassurance. It asked to be felt. So I let it. I cried in a way that wasn't dramatic or cathartic, just honest. The kind of crying that comes when you finally stop defending your past choices and let them be what they were. Not mistakes. Delays. As the grief settled, something else became clear. Leaving wasn't the end of my struggle. It was the beginning of a different one. One that didn't offer external validation or immediate relief. This struggle was internal. Now, every choice was mine. Every failure would belong to me. Every success would have no one else to credit. There was no script, no checklist, no guarantee that I hadn't ruined my life instead of saving it. That uncertainty was terrifying. But beneath it, there was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Responsibility. Not obligation, responsibility. The kind that connects your actions to your existence. The kind that says, this matters because you chose it. For the first time, my days felt fragile. Not protected by routine or expectation. Fragile in the sense that they could be shaped, or wasted, depending on how present I was. That fragility made time feel real again. I started to understand that escaping a life doesn't automatically give you a new one. It only gives you the chance to build differently, without pretending, without hiding, without borrowing certainty from others. And that chance came with a cost. Loneliness. Doubt. Regret. Fear of having chosen wrong. I was standing in the aftermath of my decision, surrounded by silence, carrying the weight of a future that no longer had instructions. And for the first time, I understood something crucial: leaving was not the hardest part. The hardest part would be staying present long enough to become someone who could live with the consequences of that choice. The moment I understood I wasn't running anymore came quietly. I wasn't escaping the old life. I was standing still long enough to feel what remained after it. That was the turning point. Up until then, everything I did was still a reaction, to pressure, to expectation, to the fear of disappearing again. Even freedom had been reactive. I was defined by what I had left, not by what I had chosen. And that wasn't enough. One morning, I woke up without a plan and didn't panic. That was new. The silence was still there, but it didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt open. Unfinished. Like a page that hadn't been written yet instead of a void that needed to be filled immediately. For the first time, I asked myself a question without trying to make it sound reasonable: what do I actually want to build now, knowing what I'm capable of avoiding? The answer didn't arrive fully formed. It arrived as a sensation. A subtle resistance to old patterns. A quiet pull toward things that required presence instead of performance. I started small. Not with grand goals or declarations, but with choices that couldn't be justified to anyone else. Choices that didn't optimize my image or future-proof my identity. Choices that felt honest in the moment and terrifying in their lack of explanation. I chose where to go without asking if it was smart. I chose how to spend my time without translating it into productivity. I chose conversations that risked awkwardness instead of maintaining ease. Each choice felt like learning a new language, clumsy, slow, emotionally expensive. But something inside me responded. The numbness began to crack. Not disappear, crack. I felt fear more sharply, but I also felt relief. I felt regret rise and fall instead of stagnating. I felt excitement in small, almost embarrassing ways. Not fireworks, flickers. And flickers were enough. I realized then that my old life hadn't failed because it was wrong. It failed because it no longer required me to be present. Presence, I learned, is the real cost of freedom. You don't get to hide behind structure anymore. You don't get to blame inertia. Every day asks you a question, and silence is no longer a neutral answer. Some days, I missed the old certainty desperately. I missed knowing exactly who I was supposed to be. I missed the reassurance of approval, the comfort of fitting into a story others could recognize. But I remembered what that comfort had cost me. It had cost me participation. And participation, even when it hurts, feels alive. I stopped trying to justify my escape. I stopped needing others to understand it. Understanding would have required them to feel the absence I had lived with, and I no longer needed validation for my reality. That was another kind of return. Returning my authority to myself. I began to notice how my relationship with time changed. Hours felt denser. Days carried memory again. I could recall how I felt yesterday, not just what I did. That alone felt like a miracle. I wasn't suddenly healed. I wasn't confident or fearless. I still questioned myself. I still mourned what I had left behind, not because it was right, but because it was familiar. But mourning didn't trap me anymore. It accompanied me. I understood something essential then: leaving the life everyone thought I wanted wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of honesty. Honesty about the version of myself I had become by staying. Honesty about the parts of me that had learned how to survive by disappearing. Honesty about time, how unforgiving it is when you wait for permission to live. I didn't find a perfect life on the other side. I found a fragile one. And fragile meant real. I learned to forgive myself, not for leaving, but for staying as long as I did. For believing that endurance was the same as loyalty. For confusing safety with belonging. Forgiveness didn't erase the cost. It allowed me to carry it. If there is a final confession in this story, it's this: I didn't escape because I was brave. I escaped because staying had become a form of self-erasure. And once you recognize that, staying is no longer neutral. To anyone listening who feels that quiet, persistent distance, the sense that your life looks right but doesn't feel inhabited, hear this: you don't need a breakdown to leave. You don't need a villain. You don't need permission. The most dangerous lives are the ones that function perfectly while you disappear inside them. I escaped the life everyone thought I wanted. Not to find happiness. Not to reinvent myself. But to stop living without myself. I don't know how the story ends. I only know that now, when something happens in my life, good or bad, I'm there for it. And after years of absence, that feels like the only ending worth choosing.